going to go through our free quiz of API 580 risk-based inspection full course from inspectortraining.com. So if you go to our course content here, you can see the free benchmark quiz, or click this button, the free quiz, and you can try it for free. I'm also going to explain what this why the question is right and why a question is wrong. Okay, question number one. The most common type of probability of failure analysis is semi-quantitative. The reason is that the quantitative is the extreme side of it, purely quantitative, and you need a lot of information and a lot of budget, a lot of time, that sometimes it's not awarded, and the risk is not level of risk with the level of scrutiny is not commensurate. It's not that much risk that you need to spend so much money. And you're not going to find the absolute risk, because risk always exists. You cannot eliminate risk. There is always risk. You just need to bring the risk down to an acceptable level. For example, you're going from point A to point B. You need to have a plan. You should have a GPS or a good car, and make sure that the car has the petrol and safe to drive, and check the roads. But then if you go for analyze every little risk, it's just simply not possible, because firstly you cannot eliminate it, and there is no point, thinking about all these minuscule things. On the other hand, qualitative, purely qualitative, you cannot, which is based on expert opinion and experience, we cannot rely completely on that. They should be based on some facts and figures as well, because then you're relying on an expert opinion, and it depends if the guy who giving you expert opinion, he doesn't have a very comprehensive knowledge on that area. So the semi-quantitative is the most popular one, because we are looking for to determine the risk with acceptable level of accuracy, and we also accept that the risk always is there, no matter what, but you have to bring it to acceptable level, or mitigate it if the risk is over the level. There's too much risk. So semi-quantitative would be the answer. Next question, detailed information and data is needed for a quantitative RBI in order to make use of logic and physical models. So quantitative is always with facts and figures, and it uses logic and physical models. It's always synonymous with that. Next, which one of the following is not an example of an invasive inspection that can cause deterioration? Now, corrosion under insulation inspection means you have to remove the insulation, so that's invasive. Removal of passivating film also is invasive, because you are removing something. And internal inspection also, you need to go inside the vessel or a storage tank, or open it anyway. And visually inspect it directly or indirectly with probes. So that's also invasive. So the only one is external inspection, where you are examining something from the outside. Or risk-based inspection reassessment not necessarily needed when installing mitigation devices. Now, if you you do a risk reassessment or inspection, RBI risk-based inspection reassessment, when you are changing from internal to on-stream inspection, because you don't get that much information on on-stream inspection compared to more detailed internal inspection. So if you are changing your inspection methods, that's sort of essential parameters. You see how that affects your previous assessment which was done internal, and now you're doing on stream. If you feed more aggressive feedstock, again you have to reassess, because the more aggressive means more corrosion and damage mechanism, or when the deterioration rate increases, that means your initial assumption probably was not very good or very valid or correct, so you have to do a reassessment. But when installing mitigation devices, that's actually you're reducing the risk. So you do reassessment when the risk is actually increased. In this case, when you install mitigation devices such as sensors for any leak detection, for example, any firefighting equipment or anything, you're actually reducing the risk. So so you don't need to reassess that. Documented mitigation plan includes all except NDE methods to detect detection. So why this is correct? Because for a mitigation plan, you need to have a proposed repair method. You should have a completion date. Even the RBI plan should have a completion date. It can't drag on forever, and you need some QA/QC activities there. But the NDE method to detect deterioration, it's already in the original inspection plan. So you may or may not need to again verify this NDE method of detection, unless the damage mechanism changes or anything else. So this is always remember, choose the answer that is the best answer in your opinion. So in this sense, you need absolutely the other three elements, but not the NDE method necessarily to detect deterioration, unless the damage mechanism changed and the existing NDE method cannot capture the possible defects as a result of the new damage mechanism. What are the minimum qualification for contractor personnel implementing RBI? So this is a straightforward. You should have a program of training demonstrating that the personnel are suitably qualified and experienced. RBI assessment type is selected on the basis of expected evaluated risk. Now, TAR planning is not the right answer. Jurisdictional authority requirement is not, because RBI is not bothered about jurisdictional authority unless jurisdictional authority affects RBI. That means you have to do, say, an annual check assessment anyway. So it can sort of veto the RBI assessment, which might come and say, no, you don't need to do it every year or every 5 years. Expected evaluated risk is eventually the criteria for assessment, and nature of expected degradation also is wrong, because this is the part of the risk, the degradation. So the degradation or the failure mode, the root cause, you need to find the damage mechanism that eventually leads to that degradation or corrosion, and then you need to see that whether that corrosion is within the expected limit or not. So eventually that's a part of the whole overall risk evaluation. So risk evaluation compared to expected degradation is a better answer here. So choose always the better answer. Which failure is distinct to loss of containment? Now, column flooding, something is over flooding or spilling out. So that's obviously a loss of containment, and by definition API 580, the failure means loss of containment. Now, loss of catalytic reactivity, that's a process, chemical process. It's not reacting enough. Doesn't mean there is a leak. Or process fouling, if it's been contaminated, it doesn't mean there is a leak, so it's not considered as a failure. The bundle failure in a heat exchanger, because that's inside the heat exchanger, so it will be an internal failure. So By loss of containment, we mean external leak, practically. Now, obviously, the owner can make an exception and say, okay, bundle failure can be also loss of containment. That's entirely up to them. But in general, that's not considered loss of containment. So the best answer will be column flooding. RBI reassessment is conducted primarily to determine the effect of changes in deterioration. So if you have changes in deterioration, that means the damage mechanism has changed, or some damage mechanism, they have been combined together, so your initial assessment was not entirely true or valid or correct or accurate. The reassessment is not to improve the operating reliability. I mean, eventually it ends that it increased the reliability, but that is the byproduct. Primarily is conducted the reassessment when you have a feeding a more aggressive fluid, or the deterioration rate increases, or the damage mechanism changes, so you do a reassessment. And you do not do reassessment to verify authenticity of data. That's called data validation. That's done during the assessment. So you want to know the data that, based on that, you are doing the assessment, whether how reliable they are. So there are different ways to do data validation, or the information that you based your assumption, or the information that received the examination, how accurate or how reliable they are. That's part of the assessment. So here, reassessment is primarily conducted to determine the effect of changes on deterioration. RBI plan to serve as a substitute for a half inspection life. Now remember that 510 pressure vessel, 570 piping, and 653 storage tank inspection codes, they all determine their life according to half-life philosophy. That means you determine the corrosion rate, the annual, and then you say, okay, in 20 years time, it can still be the same corrosion rate. Still we have got enough thickness to cover that corrosion for the next 20 years. So divided by 2, you to be on a safe side, you say you will set the inspection interval 10 years here. So that works on half-life basis. But all of them, they accept RBI as a substitute for half-life. In an RBI, who has primary responsibility? Now, obviously, everywhere the owner has the prime responsibility. It's not a person, and here the management is actually representing the owner anyway. So if you don't see, so you need to understand who is actually would be the best answer here. I mean, the team leader or project leader or safety leader does not represent by the term management. It means who facilitates and provides the budgets, and practically representing the owner by definition. When units are screened, the most important input is relative risk of process units. So as we said, we are looking for relative risk. We are not looking for absolute risk, because there's no point to get the absolute risk. It's very costly to do that, and anyway it's not that much useful. So as long as the risk is below the acceptable level, you don't need to do anything about it, unless you otherwise you have to mitigate it. So that's why the relative risk. Probability of failure analysis should address only the deterioration mechanism most likely to cause failure. So there are so many might be damage mechanism, but not all of them lead to failure. And if we want to capture every scenario, it will lose credibility, in the sense that there is a lot of money spent to analyze all of these damage mechanism, and some of them, they're not very important, and anyway they happen, and there is nothing we can do about this. So we only concentrate on those deterioration that eventually lead to failure or could lead to failure. So again, the relative risk here involved. Aspect of risk assessment common to most types and levels of RBI are expert opinion. Now here you might use logic models for quantitative, risk matrix for qualitative, and also you might calculate the risk levels. Anyway, you have to calculate it as part of the risk assessment, but the element, but the risk assessment might not be qualitative or might not be quantitative purely. So you might, if say, for example, if it's qualitative, then you don't have a logic model. So the best answer is expert opinion, which invariably use in quantitative, qualitative, and semi-quantitative risk analysis. Which of the following statements correct with regards to RBI sensitivity analysis? Use each variable value and influence on risk calculation to determine its significance. So this is the best answer, because say if you ignore all variables except those who have the largest overall influence on risk, first you need to take each variable and see which one has got the largest overall influence, and then tackle them. So this is a prerequisite to do to concentrate on the the risk which has the largest overall influence on risk, the variables. So this is the correct answer. RBI emphasizes safe and reliable operation through risk prioritized inspection. So it's not examination. Examination is part of the inspection. You use the examination recourse. So RBI, as the name I means inspection. So it's risk-based on inspection. Ultimately, RBI should correlate the risk with inspection. This is again another way of saying that. Obviously, you correlate the risk with criticality of equipment, which is the consequence of failure, and criticality the consequence, so it's a part of the risk. But you actually correlate the risk with inspection. So it's a rephrase of that. So if you see some question like this, you know that the best answer would be inspection here. The RBI assessment should be able to prioritize inspection based on risk involved. Yes. Generate the inspection plan. Yes. And RBI flags off the major risk drivers. So that is the major philosophy of RBI, to tackle the major risk drivers. So all of these are correct. And just remember that you won't receive such a thing, but the other way would be in a negative form, where you have to, there would be a wrong sentence here and you have to say which one is wrong, and then you have to click that. So you won't have a API question that say all of the above or none of the above or both A and B. How does the ISO risk line help with inspection of planning? It improves understanding of equipment relative risk. No, it doesn't show change over time, change of risk. It doesn't show determine a cost of inspection program. RBI is not concerned about the cost or assisting optimizing the inspection and mitigation plan. Well, it somehow actually does that, the ISO risk line, but eventually the first, the primary purpose of ISO risk line is to understand the relative risk level. And last question, when equipment has deteriorated to such an extent that risk of failure can't be managed to an acceptable level, the only way to mitigate risk is to replace or repair it, because inspection does not prolong the life of the equipment. It's just manage the risk, and manage the risk by the monitoring it and by telling us when it's going to fail, so you can plan for this. So that is the end of the question. If you put your email address and then you can see the results, your name and email address, and it will come to your email. And you have also put all the reasons why the question are right or wrong, and you put some explanation and tips. Thank you.